Kate here for a April and May wrap up for you. And I am really hoping that I don't repeat myself with some of the books, because now I'm realizing, like, what was the last book I wrapped up in March? I just look at Goodreads. That's how I figure out, what I should, which books I read and which books I need to wrap up. But I am so full of yawns today. Goodness. Okay. Let's see if I can get through this without yawning. The very first book that I finished was The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by Kate DiCamillo, and unfortunately it was a disappointment for me. This is one that I know so many Kate DiCamillo fans really rave about. But since so far my favorite Kate DiCamillo is, and of course I'm blanking on it right now, Flora and Ulysses, and I hear a lot of Kate DiCamillo fans say they didn't like that one that much, then I guess I shouldn't be surprised. So maybe my experience reading Kate DiCamillo is I kind of gravitate towards different things than other readers do. But one, it just felt so brief. You hear about this bunny who's a very proud glass bunny, and then through different sets of circumstances, he ends up living with different people. And it's sort of a story of his personal growth through this time. And I just felt he was with each character so briefly. And Edward Tulane himself, felt very distant as a character, and that it just felt very disjointed to me. And it's very short also. So there are some incredibly sad things that happen in there, and it just felt very jarring because I felt like I had no time to kind of acclimate myself to the situation, and then all of a sudden really tragic things are happening, whereas there wasn't this big build up, this big crescendo towards the sad part, if that makes sense at all. So unfortunately I was kind of really happy to be done with that one. It was a read aloud and I was ready to move on. Then I read Love in a Cold Climate by Nancy Mitford, and I read this with Sarah from Hardcover Hearts, and reading with Sarah was the best part of reading this. And I talk about it more in my TBR stack update. So if you want to hear about that, you can hear about my thoughts more on it later in that video. Then I read The Storm Sister by Lucinda Riley, and I loved this book. I loved this book. I'm just so excited to continue exploring Lucinda Riley's books. This was the second in her Seven Sisters series, and the seventh book will be coming out spring of next year, as long as everything goes according to plan. So I still have time to make my way through the series, but I also like saving them and savoring them. But she also has a lot of books out there. So I think I can, I have a lot of material ahead of me. But this one focuses on the second sister, whose name is Allie, and she ends up traveling to Norway to discover her heritage. And the tie-in in this one was Grieg's music, and it was tied in beautifully. I felt equally interested in the timeline from the past, hearing about Allie's ancestor, and then hearing about the present day timeline. It had some really, heartwarming elements to it, and I just am getting really attached to these different characters, and it was neat to kind of get to see sort of what part of a family, what role did Allie play within her family, within the sisters. And just, I love the idea of getting to know each sister with each book. Then next I read Eight Cousins by Louisa May Alcott, and Rose in Bloom by Louisa May Alcott. So I have a whole video talking about the two of those compacted in one video, and they are for my Louisa May 2020 project I'm co-hosting with Megan Hannett. And then I read Cousin Phillis by Elizabeth Gaskell, which is a novella. Now, I really enjoyed this. I did it as an audiobook from LibriVox. The narrator was fairly monotone, but I just really, really wanted to paint watercolors that day. I am such an amateur. Don't get excited I do these amazing paintings. I like trace something out and then I just painted it, but I wanted to do the act of painting. And so it was a really relaxing, kind of soul-fulfilling afternoon of listening to the audiobook of Cousin Phillis and painting. And I think it's just that I had really missed Elizabeth Gaskell's writing, just sitting and reveling in it. even though I was dipping in and out of Wives and Daughters, this was just a concentrated, just sitting with it. So I can't, tell you this story is amazing. You should read it. If you aren't yet an Elizabeth Gaskell fan, I don't think it's really a good place to start. But I think if you are a solid Elizabeth Gaskell fan, you'll enjoy her writing style in this. And it's an interesting short novella about, I think his name is Paul. The title of it is Cousin Phillis, and you're focused so much on Phillis, but it's narrated by Paul and his time with Phyllis's family working there and certain repercussions that happen because of him being there. And I found it a fascinating story. Then a really, really compelling read and gripping edge of my seat was Glass Houses by Louise Penny. This is the 13th in the Armand Gamache mystery series, and it might be my favorite one thus far. And, I want to show you something. So I think it was a little over a year ago, or no, it was around 2 years ago. My goodness. I received this in the mail from Kate from the novel Nomad. And you can tell, well, maybe you can't tell from the video, but this is definitely like an oversized Australian paperback. So it's lovely and floppy. And so I was just very excited to receive a book in the mail and a book from Kate because she's just become such a dear friend and we love mysteries. But then it says, "For Kate, thank you for spreading the word," and then Louise Penny's signature. So Kate attends the Adelaide Writers Festival every year, and Louise Penny was there. So I love that my Australian friend took a copy of this to be signed by a Canadian author and then mailed it to America. And it made me, even though I listened to the audiobook of this because I just love the audiobooks, it still made me so happy to know that I had an autographed copy. And I kept flipping just to look at the autograph again, like, oh, I can't believe she signed it. I can't believe she really signed it while I was listening. So in a weird way, it made me feel even more invested in the story. So yes, there's really not much I can say about this because it's such a spoiler because it's the 13th in the series. But I think for people who love Elizabeth George, you should read Louise Penny, and flip-flop that for people who love Louise Penny, you should read Elizabeth George. Sarah from Hardcover Hearts, I'm so thrilled to say I got her to read A Great Deliverance, which is the first Elizabeth George book in the Inspector Lynley series, and it really connected with her. So I was very excited to hear that. I think a friend of Louise Penny's is a friend of Elizabeth George's, vice versa. Then I read My Man Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse. This was a very 3-star read. It was a collection of short stories. I didn't realize that going in. I can like short stories, but it is hard for me to love them. And this also, not all the stories involved Bertie and Jeeves, which is Bertie Wooster and Jeeves. It's, one of the main reasons why I find those books so enjoyable. So I'll definitely continue on in the series because I've read a couple of them in the middle. I can't even remember which ones. I have to check my Goodreads, but I want to read a proper one from the series, which will be, I guess the second in the series then. Then I read Agatha Raisin and the Haunted House. This is the 14th Agatha Raisin book. And I also read Agatha Raisin and the Deadly Dance. And these are just very solidly enjoyable, cozy mysteries. I love this series so much. And I can't believe I'm not tired of it because I just feel always interested in reading more Agatha Raisin. Obviously, I had my mystery reading slump, but even that year, I managed to read a couple Agatha Raisin. So it's a solid, witty, engaging, fun, cozy mystery series. Then I read Tom's Midnight Garden by Philippa Pierce. This was a read aloud with Peter. And if any of you are new viewers, Peter is my 5-year-old son. And so before quiet rest time and before bedtime, I will read aloud something. And some nights I feel too tired to do it, but I really try to make it a priority. And this was one that he really, really enjoyed, and I somewhat enjoyed. It's one that very much relied on the plot to keep you engaged. And I found a very interesting concept where this boy, Tom, he is staying with an aunt and uncle while he's quarantined. So I was like, I can't believe, what are the chances we would read this during the COVID-19 fiasco that we're having this year. And he's quarantined, but he's quarantined because his brother has measles. And staying with an aunt and uncle, he's very bored. And one night can't sleep, and he walks out, and all of a sudden, in the backyard that used to be boarded up, there is an enchanted garden. And there are children playing in the garden, and only one of the children can see him. And so it's about their relationship, and kind of he's trying to figure out the magic that's happening in the backyard, why it's only in the middle of the night that the garden is there. So I think this is one that it's very well written. I just didn't feel totally engaged with it, but I definitely recommend it. And especially if you like a more plot-driven book, I was very impressed by the writing, and Peter loved it. Then I read The Queen of Hearts, the 8th in her Royal's Finest mystery series. This was a buddy read with Kate from the novel Nomad, and I did not enjoy this. Her Royal's Finest mysteries are some of my favorite. It's a beloved mystery series by me, but I have realized about myself, and I didn't realize it until reading this, I don't like books set in Hollywood. They always have the same tropes of, sleazy, materialistic people, because, let's just be honest, the whole Me Too movement starting in Hollywood, there's a fair amount of that there in Hollywood. And just extreme materialism, and just chasing after things that are fleeting, and people so concerned with fame, it's just so unappealing to me. So this mystery just didn't stand a chance. I wanted to read through it, and all the parts that were not about Hollywood, I enjoyed those chapters a lot. So I just kind of knew a couple chapters in, okay, this is what's going to be like, and I just have to plow through it, because I wanted to see the journey that Georgiana took in this book, so then I could get to the next book in the series. But I definitely viewed it as a bridge in the series. Then I read Elizabeth Gaskell, A Habit of Stories by Jenny Uglow. This is one I was able to clear off my currently reading. It was such an amazing reading experience. I'm so glad that I put in the time for it, and I actually have filmed a whole lengthy review. I did not lose the footage for that, and I will be putting it up, I really hope, very soon, because it's something I want to share with the world. Then I read The Prairie Beef by Melissa Wiley. This is a middle grade book. It was a read aloud that I did. It's about a little girl whose father is accused of stealing from a local town member, and he is in jail. And this is set in the Wild West, and so she needs to prove that he didn't do it, or he will be hung. So I was like, this is very serious stuff. But she needs to prove his innocence. And so it's about her journey to do that. It was very fun. It's very charming, some interesting characters in there, and definitely one that was really enjoyable. Then I have Meadowland, The Private Life of an English Field by John Lewis-Stempel. This was a very quiet read. Another one I was able to clear off my currently reading. I didn't make quite as much progress in that area as I was hoping, but still one that I am I'm glad I was able to knock a couple off the list. And I just really just felt kind of in awe of John Lewis-Stempel's writing. It starts out, you read the first couple months and it just seems rather simple of a book, but then you really just start to sit and soak it all in, and it's so beautifully written, and just the intimate experiences that he manages to have in this one meadow over the course of a year, and the way he kind of turns everything into a opportunity for reflection is really touching. And for instance, he has his big tractor mower, and he's going to mow the field. He does it, I think it's twice a year he does it, or maybe it's only once a year, but he's going to do it, and it ends up breaking down. One of the blades gets jammed with a rock, something like that. And he ends up doing it all by hand with a scythe. And so it ends up being this real time for personal reflection, and it's just very poetic and very lyrical. Then I read the 5th Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, and I was an emotional basket case by the end. I know how these things are going to end. This is, how many times have I read this series, and it still hurts so much. I'm having so much fun reading this series. The 6th one I have on hold, and I cannot wait to get to it. Then I have I read Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted, by Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. And this was for my literary parlor 19th century book club. You know, I would say Victorian book club, but now that we're reading American books, I'm like, well, I guess it's technically just a 19th century book club. But this is a book written by an African American woman, and it is a story of a woman who was no, I don't want to give anything away, but it's a story of kind of an experience of being African American during the time of right before Reconstruction. So when slavery is still legal, and then afterwards. So it's a very compelling story. My only issue with it, it was very beautifully written, but my issue was it kind of felt half novel and half essay. And I'm one of those people that, you know, The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand should just be an essay. I'm like, if you could say it in an essay, you know, in 20 pages, why are you going to put these speeches where the characters are pontificating about all their views on slavery and equality, which are really interesting and good fodder for thought, but I think that it's just not my favorite kind of novel. So half the novel I was interested in, and then the other half I was kind of like, okay, here we go with more philosophy. But still, I think it was a really neat experience to read it, and just to see how there was so much gray area at the time of Reconstruction. And then I read Bound by Donna Jo Napoli. This is for my Cinderella Chronicles project. So once I like to have 3 books to wrap up for my Cinderella Chronicles videos. So once I have 3 Cinderella retellings that I've read, I'll then talk about those in a video there. Then I read The Great Brain by John D. Fitzgerald. This is a children's book that was published in the 50s, and he was quite prolific. There are many books in this Great Brain series, and I kind of had a divided experience with The Great Brain. The first part of me, it was very, very funny. His brother's very clever. His brother is the Great Brain, so the one narrating is not the one who's considered the Great Brain, and he just talks about the ways that his brother is clever and is able to get what he wants. But the parts that I struggled with was there was a whole plot line with a boy that gets an infection in his leg, and he ends up having to have the leg amputated because where he got the infection was a place his parents told him not to play, and so he stepped on an old nail, and then he waited too long to tell them. And so then after he gets his leg amputated, he asks the Great Brain for help on how to commit suicide. And this is a 10-year-old child. And so it's not that, you know, it just felt very jarring for it to be in a children's book that comes off very humorous, and then all of a sudden there's that in it. So it almost felt like 2 books. I really liked his writing, but that was just really, I kind of didn't know how to process once I got to that part of it. But I think I would be interested in continuing the series. I'm not sure. It just ended on such a weird note. I mean, he doesn't commit suicide. The 10-year-old, good gracious, does not commit suicide. But it was just a very intense thing to just have added in all of a sudden. Then I did a reread of Deerbrook by Harriet Martineau. So I'm hoping right after filming this to do my video that I'm late for. I was supposed to put it up Monday, 2 days ago. It is what it is. And then I read The Song of the Lark by Willa Cather. And I think I will save my thoughts for my TBR stack update, because not telling you here will motivate me to get through more of my TBR stack. And that is my wrap up. I see I'm running about 20 minutes, so that's better. I was worried it was going to be about 30 minutes. But I hope you enjoyed hearing about those. Let me know kind of your thoughts on any of those that you have read, and I will be back for another video soon. Bye.